Hello, and welcome to this, let me get up from kneeling edition of the Purple Journal podcast.
Welcome to this Dad Noises edition of...
Yes, those are my noises. What are you doing?
I was trying to imply that I was kneeling, but I didn't actually want to kneel because the sounds would have been a lot worse than that.
You just should have just went to the locker room. You didn't have to kneel and hurt yourself.
There you go. Simple solutions to complex problems. How you guys doing? Before I introduce you, it's been a couple weeks since we've done the show. Obviously,
it's been a couple weeks, hasn't it?
It's been a long off season. Let's just put it at that. As always,
he's Luke and you're Joe.
Yeah, I was gonna say as always, but according to historical record, I am here with Joe Oberly, who is a writer for purplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and the Sports Post, and he was also at OTAs this week.
Hey, hello. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
Good.
If you couldn't tell, I'm keeping the entire beginning of this conversation. I'm not editing any of it. It's part of my new exposure, fresh, raw content.
Good. If this is excruciating, that means all the conversations later will look a lot better by comparison.
That's exactly.
This is like Bob Dylan does it. Just, he wants his guys on edge that he works with, his musicians, and just does raw takes and takes it live. And if the mistakes are in there, they're going. I love it.
There you go.
Oh, Bobby D. My man. Bob Dylan made it into this Galdang podcast. That is awesome.
And we're like 2 minutes in.
So when Dylan went electric, what did you think, Joe? I'm also here with Luke Braun. Speaking of raw content and painfully awkward intros, he writes for purplePTSD Vikings Territory. He is the co-host of the Pocket Protectors podcast over on the Climbing the Pocket Network, which is a group of fellows that we are working with and kind of highlighting some of their content podcast-wise on our network, so that's pretty cool. But how have you been, Mr. Braun?
Doing good. Just did a Pocket Protectors yesterday. We talked about Richie Incognito, and then that conversation became real time.
Yeah, that's funny how that happened, because we were there was an article by a new writer, Tyler Haig, I want to say. Sorry, Tyler, that's not how you pronounce your last name. Who's writing for us on Vikings Territory about bringing in Richie Incognito, and we'll touch on this in a little bit, I guess, because we need to talk about the offensive line and maybe like who is available or who might become available during camp when there's cuts. But yeah, it's amazing how quickly that fell apart. That whole.
I think Tyler Haig should call his columns the Haig Trials.
Ooh.
Oh my.
Deep dive.
I was just gonna say, how do you know if Richie's coming in or not? If he's always incognito, I don't know. Maybe that's this whole psyche thing. Sorry.
We got dad noises and dad jokes here on the.
What about Luke's? Luke just had one. He's not a dad.
That was more of like knock the books out of someone's hand in the hallway in high school kind of joke. Yours is more of a. I have like a dad bod, if your dad was John Candy, and now we've got the trifecta. Anyway, Joe, you... It's not, this is... me being a host is like, it's an instrument that you have to practice. And I've been away, and, it's hard. I mean, ask anybody. Ask Jimmy Fallon.
It should be a catastrophe. I'm glad it's a catastrophe.
If we don't entertain ourselves, we wouldn't entertain anybody. So,
that is so true. Joe, you were over at the Twin Cities Orthopedic Center, or the TCO Center, for OTAs this week. Before I die, I really want to also join you at stuff like that and get a press pass, because I think that is really amazing, and I don't think that's something that, I mean, we talk about it, but it's a kind of in a casual way, just so we sound like we've been there before. But it is pretty amazing that you get to go over and experience those sort of things. So starting out with the OTAs, I wanted to obviously talk about my hero and role model, Mr. Kirk Cousins. Obviously, he was slanging the ball around the field.
I've gone into the whole Kirk Cousins thing, just kind of viewing it askance, kind of glaring off the side of my eye because, I wasn't on board like we know you were, Joe, from the get-go. So, he's looking at me the same way, Kirk Cousins. No, I'm kidding. But, he impressed me the other day. Obviously the first chance I got to look at him, but, it's the silliest thing. I was talking with AJ Mansour from KFan, and we were just chatting about how the body language of him is so different than what we have seen. I mean, I wrote about it in the story of my OTA wrap-up about in the past couple of years, you're worried about the next step by your quarterback might be his last, whether it was Bradford with his balky knees or Bridgewater coming off his and what have you. And here's this guy out here just running up and down and around and full of energy and fist pumping and he's jogging back and forth after his plays and just it was totally different. Here's a guy who's in full command of his abilities, and I really felt like he was a guy who had the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders, at least the weight of Washington anyway, because he seemed to be really happy to be there, and when he came off the field, he's ripping on his teammates as they're going into the locker room, and I heard some of the players talk about him. They seem to like him already. They say he seems to be a fun guy, and he's got plenty of energy and that's all before you even start analyzing just how well he throws the ball. He definitely has some zip on it. But yeah, it was from that standpoint alone, it was like, wow, this is different. And part of it may be me because you saw these guys that were hurt going out there and you didn't know what was going to happen. Here's a guy that hasn't been hurt in his career that much, and he just seems healthy and ready to go. So it was fun.
Did you have a chance to talk to him? Luke, in the locker room? I was wondering if something I noticed, just like in his the juxtaposition, I guess, between like his personality off the field versus how he is on the field. Is he one of those guys that's kind of soft-spoken or not super intense, like in an interview, but he like goes obviously the famous clip of him, the "you like that" and all that. He gets really riled up on the field apparently.
They haven't had an availability with him yet. It was just the one day that they had open to the media, and we had guys like Harrison Smith and DiFilippo talked and Zimmer and Stephon Diggs. But I think maybe we'll get Cousins next week. Hopefully he'll talk to the media. But it wasn't him. And Kai Forbath talked and Kendall Wright, and he didn't talk anything about not being in a car anywhere
in Texas.
Yeah,
but Terrence Williams making things up.
Yeah, he just jogged up from Texas with a head injury from a car crash.
We'll get Kirk later. It'll be fun to assess what he's really like. But it was fun. I mean, I'm sure you all read about the big deep pass he threw to Diggs. About a 60-yarder, and it was later.
Dying to see that highlight.
Oh God, it was coming right at us and on the sidelines, and they were playing from the other end, and you just saw all of a sudden Cousins takes a step forward, steps in, and just wings it, and it looked like he really put a lot on it, but he floated it right in there. Diggs had to stretch a little bit and then tumbled after he caught it, but it was great stuff, no question about it.
You mentioned something that wasn't really on the agenda, but that is super interesting, I guess, in this just the context of what's going to happen this season. The availability of DiFilippo. What did he say?
Oh, he was pretty interesting. I thought the guy had the polish of someone who's a head coach in waiting. He knows the drill certainly. And I think he's excited to be calling plays this year. They asked him about that, and he just said that he's been kind of grooming himself towards that for a long time, and And he got excited talking about Cousins because, he's only seen him from the other side of the field and went out in the NFC East. But I think he's pretty sharp, and it definitely not slick, but he's smooth. He knows what he's talking about, and I think very confident. And he was saying how he's a really high energy guy, so he kind of relates to Diggs, Diggs was talking about how he just really gets into DiFilippo because of their energy, and they kind of feed off each other. So he goes, I'm excited to work with someone like that. Same thing about Cousins. There's a lot of energy there, and it might be exciting to see this offense really get fired up and really go this year.
I think you're going to see that kind of thing like endear this whole fan base really, really quickly when they're running. Like the first touchdown they scored, they're all going to run around, and you'll see Cousins and Diggs running around, and DiFilippo right in there with them, and it's going to be really, really, really endearing and fun to watch.
I'd agree with that.
And that'll be by your guys' estimation, what, Game 3 or Game 4? The first touchdown?
Oh. Hey, Game 3 is against the Bills. We might get Josh Allen.
Ooh. Yeah, what else? What other takeaways did you have from OTAs? Obviously, one of the big takeaways was the absence of Anthony Barr. I wrote just a quick blurb about that situation and how it basically he talked to Zimmer on Saturday at the youth camp that they held there and let him know he wasn't going to make it. It's a voluntary thing. He's not getting penalized or anything. And
he has no workout bonuses either, so it makes a lot of sense for him to be that much less at an injury risk when he probably has a pending contract negotiation.
Do you think that's what it is, or do you think that his agent said let's try to get your extension going, or if it's a mix between the two?
I don't think it's like a power leverage play so much as it is he definitely doesn't need the install days, right? He's been in this defense since 2014, and he has no workout bonuses, so there's not a huge incentive for him to go. And if you're on the cusp of getting this huge extension, you don't want, and you just saw two players blow out their ACLs at other OTA practices, and you don't really need to be there for any reason. Yeah, I'd stay home.
It does make sense. I agree with you, Luke. And when you consider the fact that Joe, as you wrote, he was there at the facility for Zimmer's foundation gathering and told him face to face, I thought that's pretty stand up too. And it's not like I'm going to go talk to the media and hold out and plead my case through the media. He just says, I'm not going to be there, and he doesn't have to be. And of course the media asked him about it, and Zimmer kind of gave his usual, he didn't appreciate the question and didn't want. He says, I don't get involved in that stuff, but it's between them, and it should be at this time, and nobody should be trying to make a bigger thing out of it than it is. I think when you see Eric Kendricks get he's drafted a year later and he gets a nice extension, you're going to want to line yourself up for one as well. And I've seen some people on our site and other places that say, "Oh, let him go."
Why is that always the first reaction from our readers? Cut him.
Vikings fans are so obsessed with getting rid of good players.
Yes, yeah. That is the biggest thing that has driven me insane since my youth. With the Xavier Rhodes, quote unquote, mutiny against the Packers, everyone's like, get rid of him. Like, what?
The problem with it,
his character, please.
Yes, the problem with it even more so is the assumption is get rid of him and then go pick up the guy who's even better and for less money. Now, who would that be? It's
arguably Michael Kendricks.
Pardon me?
Arguably Michael Kendricks? I don't think Michael Kendricks is better than Anthony Barr or even really close, but there are some people who think that.
Yes, exactly. But, he's you got a proven guy who knows the system and he has done well. And I like the devil you know rather than the one you don't, we don't even know how Sheldon Richardson's going to be this year. We traded defensive tackles with Seattle, and who knows if that'll work out for the Vikings or not. So I don't agree with that attitude. I think you want to get Barr signed, you want to get Diggs signed, and everybody else that you need. Just keep that defense where it is for a few years, and then let somebody else have them after they're out of their prime.
Let somebody else overpay him. I think the only takeaway that you can, like, the only speculation that I think, like, I buy out of this is that I think this signals that Barr is going to be the next one to get his extension. I think the Vikings ultimately want to extend all three of the big ones, but it just makes me think that Barr is first up because he's the one that is close enough to his contract being signed to, like, want to, be taking steps to be extra cautious about injury. And he didn't see Diggs or Hunter do that, which makes me think that, it's less on their mind. But that's also just, pure speculation. And absolutely, you can say, oh, Hunter got his extension tomorrow, and that would also make sense and not be surprising.
That's not a bad take, Luke, because, when they asked Wednesday, when they asked Diggs about it, he was just Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky, almost like, you could almost read into it.
It sounded like he hadn't thought about it in months.
Exactly. You can almost say that he's got his Minnesota Miracle in his back pocket. He's going to get paid. But he says, I don't think about that. He goes, I'm really happy. I love being here. I love playing for the Vikings. And it was genuine. You could tell that he really liked it. And he's not looking to move, And he wants to keep building what they're doing. So, and maybe, this was, Zimmer and Barr looked each other in the eye and said, okay, maybe he's next. I kind of like that take.
Yeah, and I don't know how much cap space they have left or how all the cap works next year. I mean, with obviously the Richardson signing and the Cousins signing, there was a lot of fear from people that they were going to have to make a choice between, well, at this point it would be Barr, Diggs, and Hunter. It doesn't seem like that's the reality, but do they kind of need to space these things out, or why? Also, take either one of these. I'll just throw them both up there. What do you guys read into the fact, like you mentioned, Joe, that Kendricks was a year further removed from his deal? They play next to one another, and that he got the deal before Barr. I don't think anybody would argue that Barr is more valuable of this defense than Kendricks is. He's all over the place. He's amazing. Not to take anything away from Barr, because obviously he's a good player too. But
does it have to do with when they were drafted? I mean, are the rookie contracts different? I don't even know. I
think it's that Kendricks was the cheaper one, and you could do that easier.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. I being drafted a year apart. You know what I mean? I mean, that just seemed like they renewed Kendricks sooner before his contract year than Barr.
Yeah, which might give somebody pause, but I don't think they're gonna mess around with Barr. They know how valuable he is.
And they could have thought too that if they waited another year, that maybe Kendricks' value would continue to increase.
Yeah.
True. So why not lock him in?
Well, you don't get a fifth-year option with Kendricks either. So
okay.
They're both in contract years because Kendricks was a second-round pick.
Okay, that's it. I knew there was something there that was a little goofy.
In terms of cap space, though, between Barr, Diggs, and Hunter, the math has been worked out a lot. There are a lot of different ways to do it. It's difficult because you do have to get them to agree to numbers that, Diggs can't be the highest paid wide receiver, and he might want to be, and that might cause an issue
in the league.
But you can, he's the next receiver to get his contract, and generally, if you're in that top tier where Diggs is, in my opinion, and you're the next one signing, you're going to want to, be getting the most money or whatever because the cap goes up. And I don't know if you can do that with him, and that maybe will cause friction. But one thing that Brzezinski has been doing, and I think he'll continue to do, is he's actually been offering guarantees as a bargaining chip. Eric Kendricks took a contract that actually makes the next couple years. He's really cheap for the next couple years, where I think the cap is going to be the most strained. And then once you're out of the Cousins contract, you either, extend him if you want to, whatever. But the 3 years of the Cousins contract, Kendricks is kind of deflated. And I think he allowed that to happen because he has guarantees in the years after that, which means you can't underpay him for 3 years then cut him. So that security is really valuable to Kendricks, and it allows you to offer him a lower overall number, save your cap space, and still keep the player happy.
Didn't he get 5 for $50 million and $25 million guaranteed? I think?
Yep.
Yeah, and if you look at the structuring like year to year to get through that 25, I think he's got guarantees all the way into like 2022. Yeah, he's a Viking for life, pretty much.
It's like when the NHL was giving out those 14-year contracts.
Yeah,
the football
which is great
version.
because like we want Kendricks to be a Viking for life. He's a good player, and that's awesome. And he gets to be secure and happy, and gets to stay on the team and be like have the career trajectory of Chad Greenway. That's great for him. And you manage to do it in a way that keeps the salary cap under control and like gives you that much more resource to work with when it comes to Diggs, Barr, and Hunter.
They say that Brzezinski is the master, but you see things that happen. Last time we talked, what's his name? Brian Robeson got cut a couple $1 million, and so there's a couple more million in cap space for him. And I heard Pat Royce grumble about that on the air, just saying, getting these guys to take that cut in their last year. But the truth be told, I'm not sure that he would have found that same kind of salary elsewhere either. But so you never know.
He didn't seem bothered by it.
Nope, not at all.
He said, "I'd gladly do it. We're trying to win." I mean, he's 35. He's made a bunch of money for a fourth round guy who was rotational for most of his career.
Absolutely.
He's in it for the ring.
So that's the kind of guys you need too. I guess Brzezinski keeps doing it every year. Hopefully he can do it with this one because they got to get Hunter signed. They got to offer something to Trey Waynes if he's going to continue to keep improving. I'd love to see this defense stay intact for a few more years.
I do think next season you're going to make a choice between Sheldon Richardson and Trey Waynes, and I think it's going to be a fascinating talker, depending on what happens over the season. So I don't think you can extend both of them.
Right.
But that would be fascinating to see them let Waynes go for Sheldon Richardson, who, in some people's opinion, is a more valuable player.
How old is Richardson?
I was just going to ask.
He's like 26.
26? Really? Oh, man.
27, something like that. He's like in his prime.
Wow.
He just played out his rookie contract.
Oh my, yeah, he is something you want to hang on to. And then if you got Mike someone out there, it's a huge year for Trey Waynes. There's no two ways about it. He was right on his tail, and we'll see if he's on his tail. But
and that, letting Waynes go, I mean, he might be the top corner on the market. I would not be shocked if the Vikings let him go after he played out his fifth-year option and he was the top corner on the market. And that's not really an indictment of Waynes himself. It's just a matter of the way the defense is composed. They have the resources to, if they have three corners that they feel confident in, and they let him go, he'll go make his money elsewhere, and the Vikings will be able to hang on to somebody else that's important that they can't easily replace.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see Hughes out running around?
I did not pay attention to him. My first thought I was thinking I was going to write something about Dalvin Cook because it was so fun to see him out there, but then he really didn't do a whole lot. But then Cousins caught my eye, and my askance eye, as I mentioned earlier, and I just spent a lot of time watching him and watching the offense. I really didn't pay much attention to the defense in the short time we got to watch it, to be honest.
What did you? So when it comes to Cook, you said he wasn't doing a whole lot. I mean, obviously he's coming off of that injury from last year. I mean, was he?
He's moving around well. I mean, but he's they're not letting him in on a lot of drills. He did a lot of workout over with Eric Sugarman. Over on the side with a number of guys who are doing rehab drills and stuff. And I mean, he some of the, some pass catching early on, but as soon as they got on 11 on 11, he's standing on the sidelines. And they got a whole host of people. I mean, Kyle Rudolph with his, I think it was his ankle or foot, I can't remember. You got Everson Griffin with the plantar fasciitis. Even Zendejo was over there working with the rehab group for a while too, and Tyler Conklin was over there.
Were Easton and Elfline over there too?
Elfline was not taking part, but Easton was. He was in at center.
Oh.
I think Courtney Cronin reported that the Everson Griffin thing was a different foot thing. It had nothing to do with his plantar fascia. It was just some soreness or something like that. Which actually feels pretty good because that's probably more likely to be a minor issue than plantar fascia that's lasted over the whole offseason.
Right. Yeah, he was just dressed not in street clothes, but he had tennis shoes on. He was not even considered playing. A lot of the other guys still had, Dalvin Cook had his uniform on, but during the 11-on-11, his helmet was off, so he wasn't going in there. But
it's kind of the advantage of having a defense that's been together for so long. A lot of these players, they have so much continuity together that they can pick up right where they left off, and you can be super cautious with them and not have to worry about install things. And it also lets you get more work in with the rookies. Which
is a great point. And on the converse of that, the offense is in their third new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, new quarterback,
third new starting coordinator.
Yeah,
it couldn't be it's the polar opposite right there. I mean, in a nutshell. How about that? A team that has just got an offense that's been changing figureheads, or not figureheads, but main cogs the past 2-3 years, and now you got a defense that's really been intact. It's interesting. But we'll see how it all gels together. I mean, Cousins and DeFilippo and the rest of the group gotta get on the same page quickly. And by what I saw on Wednesday, they were having fun. They seemed to be enjoying each other's company and working together. And Cousins would zip the ball on outs and short patterns. He had a lot of juice on the ball, and it was fun to see. It's just you got Bradford, who was always this kind of lackadaisical guy, who was the starter last year in the early going, and he's just kind of a chill personality. And here's Cousins, who's all fired up, and I swear, he's got to be feeling like he's got a new lease on life. His future's set, and his past is behind him, and let's go. So it's
Joe,
pretty.
Would you dare say that he looked like a kid out there?
No. Yeah, well, maybe. He was having fun. I mean, when after he hit that pass to Diggs downfield, he jumped and pumped his fist, and it's the first practice of OTA, so
love that. Did you guys see that series that went out during the draft time with Cousins and all the rookie quarterbacks? That wake up call series?
No.
Oh, Jay, you would love this. So Kirk Cousins sat down with a bunch of rookie prospects, Josh Allen, Kyle Lauletta, a couple others, and the best part of it is they basically just sat down at a whiteboard and had the rookies talk about college passing concepts and the passing concepts that they ran in college, and then Kirk Cousins would just rattle off what 3 different teams called the same play and why NFL defenses are going to be better against it, and all this. It is the coolest content ever. And it's our quarterback now doing it. Yeah, look up Wake Up Call with Kirk Cousins. It's all on YouTube. It's the coolest thing.
That's awesome.
I'll have to do that because I it's something I don't know enough about, of that transition, from college to pro and how different it is. I mean, you certainly know it to a certain degree, but to have some insider info like that would be fun. So, go ahead.
Sorry, Cousins' coaches and all of the kind of buzz around him, everybody says that he's got this incredible mind for football. He really understands and can read things quickly, and he's always been a good pre-snap quarterback.
He's a really smart guy, in general, and he comes from
on display. It's so cool.
I think his dad is a doctor.
They were calling him an anticipatory thrower. That was the word from both DeFilippo and from Zimmer on Wednesday. Anticipatory, throwing people open.
And I don't think enough is made. I have to bring up my Big Ten bias once a show. Hearing from Johnny Manziel, the interview he gave a while back, that was very honest, and him talking about if the Cleveland Browns had done their homework, they would have never drafted him, and him talking about the offense that they ran at Texas A&M and how basically there was the way it works versus the pro offense where it's a spread offense. There's usually just 3 options that they do. It doesn't require a lot of what we're talking about, and that's why I think the jump is harder for some people than others that like the Big Ten running a pro-style offense. I think that is a huge thing that not a lot of people take into consideration when they just look at, arm strength or whatever. And so I think not enough has been made about Cousins, and not only just the Big Ten thing, but how he elevated Michigan State's program. He's the winningest QB in Michigan State history. They weren't, they were the little brother to Michigan for forever. And
come on, Joe, just get off Cousins' back. He's pretty good. He's going to be all right.
Well, here's the deal. I think that he elevated that program to, not just by himself. Obviously, their defense was amazing. But he beat Michigan, which was something that never really happened. And I do think that a lot of that ties into where his success may come. But I followed 5 different segues. And I want to touch on the receivers a little bit before we get into this. But I'm starting to hear little remnants of not a devil on my shoulder, but a Luke Brown on my shoulder when I look at my manifesto of 3,000 words about the offensive line, which we'll touch on. The kind of dueling panic between me and Michael Rand from the Star Tribune in regards to the offensive line that we've talked about, texted each other about a few times, since we seem to both kind of feel the same way. But in regards to just the receivers really quickly, I know that from what I read, obviously we talked about the Diggs stuff. There was a few. It said that he was connecting with Thielen throughout the day. Beyond that, did you see him throwing to Treadwell or Kendall Wright at all? And how drunk was Wright?
I didn't notice Wright, but I did listen to him speak, and I was impressed after practice. I noticed that Laquan Treadwell was over on the rehab field for a while. I don't know what that was about, but he was. Yeah, and I thought to myself right there, that's the last thing this dude needs is some injury that he's going to be nursing. But it's early. I mean, it's May, for crying out loud, so it's nothing to worry about. But I did notice that Chad Beebe wears number 84. And I'm going to think that if he makes the team, he's going to probably have to switch that, because aren't they going to retire? Wouldn't you think they would retire that number come this
They'll probably
season?
do it in one of the half times.
Yes, absolutely. But DeFilippo said this, and he said, he goes, I have to say that I think with the first team that they not one ball hit the ground, and it was really true. Everybody was catching passes out there, and Cousins was hitting them, throwing them open or hitting them in the numbers or in the hands. It was pretty impressive in that regard. So like I said, I was more focused on him than anything else. I mean, Thielen was out there making his catches that he usually does, and he looks. It's just kind of funny to have seen his maturation, from a guy going from who was just digging and grinding for a job, and here he is at the top of his game, and he's one of the leaders out there for this wide receiver unit. So it'll be fun to watch both him and Diggs, how they do this year and who joins them. I'm not going to ready to say who the third one is, but I'm sure Kendall Wright's in the mix for sure. And
I think that wide receiver 3 battle is so interesting to me because it's between two guys who play really different positions. Kendall Wright didn't. I don't think he took a single outside snap in Chicago.
Wow.
And I think and Treadwell doesn't have the agility to play in the slot at all, and he doesn't have the releases, and they've never put him in the slot. He's an outside guy. You kind of have a pure slot guy and a pure outside guy, and that means that they're not really competing with each other as much as you think. And It's more about what DeFilippo wants to do with Diggs and Thielen, because both of those players have had success outside and success in the slot. So I think, you could have, if you want to put one of them in the slot, you put Treadwell on the field, and if you want to put them both outside, you put Wright on the field. And I think the snap counts is going to come down more to that than it will the actual skill levels of Wright and Treadwell, because I think how you use Diggs and Thielen will have a much greater impact on the offense than what you're doing with the random other tertiary players. And I think the only thing that could change that is if Kendall Wright is just a disaster for some reason, or if Treadwell is just this total mess, then obviously you have to do something else. But I think if they're both around the same level, and they both played around similar snap counts, had similar target counts last year, they kind of were seen at similar levels by their teams. I think it's going to be a lot more of a strategic decision and a lot less of like an evaluation of the two players.
We talked about Trey Waynes, but it's going to be a huge year for Treadwell, and I just I'm really concerned about him. I have not ever seen him separate himself in any way from anybody else that's on the field. You know, I mean, not only talking about defense against the defense, but just in the other in the other receivers in the room. It just, and oh my God, I hope he's not hurt, because I think it's huge for him. And the fact that they brought in, you know, I mean, they're looking at other people, and they're gonna, you know, they're gonna have somebody battling for him, and it's to the point where they say, okay, if it isn't going to happen, see you later, and you got to kiss that first draft choice goodbye. So big year for him.
I think they kind of already have. I mean, it would be absurd if he lived up to his if he by the end of his career, if we're saying Treadwell lived up to his first round pedigree, that would be a miracle. And I think we have to adjust our expectations at this point. And it's okay to be disappointed that we have to do that, but I think it's just not productive to hold him up to a first-round standard anymore, which sucks, but we just have to say he's kind of the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and now he's just a role player, and that's his value to the Vikings.
What's interesting is, and I wrote about this in this article I keep plugging, about the picks that this team has made on offense, the lesser amount versus the ones on defense, and then the lower hit rate in terms of high round picks actually staying on the team for more than, you know, the rookie contract. And I've said a few times that you can't take, you know, I'm balancing all these horrible first and second round wide receiver picks that have happened in the last 10 years almost, and saying that how can you balance that against the fact that the Vikings have arguably the best 1-2 wide receiver duo. And you have to, the interesting thing about the Treadwell thing is obviously, you know, they didn't know what they had in Thielen at the time, because otherwise they wouldn't have spent a first round pick on Treadwell. They thought Treadwell would come in and start. And you can kind of trade that first-round pick and say, well, they got lucky in the fact that Thielen stepped in and produced like a first-rounder times, you know, whatever. And so it's not like there's a net negative. Obviously, if Treadwell would have worked out and they've had 3 receivers that are amazing, that would be great too. But they at least got lucky in the fact that that pick, you can say, well, Thielen turned into the guy that year, and that's perhaps why Treadwell hasn't developed, because he's not getting as many snaps. But at least they didn't have the situation where they spent a first round pick and they're screwed like the Bears with Kevin White or something, in that there's a huge drop off at the position, if that makes any sense.
At that point, you just have to stop attaching this draft position to these players as they develop.
Exactly.
No, I don't think that's fair though, because I think that
to a certain degree it is. I think
when you spend like 7 picks on the first 2 or 3 rounds and they all flame out, and then an undrafted free agent comes in, that's not something that, it is a lucky thing, and you have to say, okay, we have a problem selecting receivers higher in the draft, because
you're comparing across a bunch of different regimes though. There's not a lot of common ground. I mean, it's fair to say they drafted the wrong receiver, right? They should have taken Michael Thomas. That is absolutely true. But I think if you're going to try to say, well, the Vikings can't evaluate wide receivers, this iteration of the Vikings has really only taken Treadwell high. If you want to like cut it off at 2012 when they organized their front office the way that it's organized now, I think they've only taken Treadwell as a wide receiver higher than like the 3rd round, right? Or am I forgetting someone? Or Patterson too. Patterson.
Yeah, they had Patterson.
So 0 for 2, but that's better than like 0 for 7.
Yeah, you know, but I mean,
like Sidney Rice and Troy Williamson, those are irrelevant.
Well, Troy Williamson is irrelevant, but Sidney, Spielman was still part of the decision-making process for.
But it was a totally differently composed group than what the group that's going to take on. Like, if you're worried about the group taking on the 2019 draft, Spielman might be the only common ground. Everybody else is different.
Yeah, but he was still there, and the concepts are still the same in that they.
And he has a different level of power.
For sure. But I still think that when you consistently do the same thing, which is I know how this sounds, but taking receivers from the SEC in the first or second round, and he was a part of those decisions then. Every wide receiver except for Troy Williamson, he was a part of the decision of. And they all don't work out. I feel like maybe try something else.
But look at how they've what they've learned. I mean, what do you know about Spielman in a draft? He wants as many bites from the apple as he can. So he amasses a bunch of late round picks and drafts people. And then in the last 2 years, they have said it both years that they are putting a more concerted effort at undrafted free agents. And they're bringing people in there. So, I mean, that to me tells me that you can get wide receivers, later in the draft. You can get good players, and they know that because they've seen so many undrafted and so many late round. I mean, Diggs was a 5th rounder, right? And Thielen was undrafted, So they're learning that, that all the hype that is attached to a person like Laquan Treadwell is a lot of hype. And we're seeing that. Kendall Wright's not working out, or not Kendall Wright, who's Kevin White down in Chicago. I mean, this stuff happens,
Kevin White's more of a lucky thing than Treadwell. Treadwell is just a miss. Like, it sucks, and you wish that a first-round pick didn't whiff horribly, but it did. And
I just look at
the roster's still really good.
I look at Treadwell like I look at Patterson, and they're two guys that ran maybe 4 route trees, or 4 routes total. My buddy that came to the draft party had Treadwell out, and I'm not insulting him at all in regards to his intelligence, but they had him read a card to the students, and he couldn't read it. I feel like you have to look at receivers, and the Michael Thomas thing is a good way to put that, because I was a huge Michael Thomas guy, and I've brought that up a few times because I always like to give myself credit since I whiff on other things. But I was a huge Michael Thomas guy because he ran pro-style routes, and when you get guys like Patterson who can't count the amount of yards on a 10-yard out consistently, like you have to...
Same thing with Treadwell, too. It was route depth.
You have to say these guys, they didn't run more than 4 or 5 routes.
You missed on Adam Thielen, though. I mean, it happens, I mean, it is a crap.
But you have to admit that you put more weight into a first or second round pick than an undrafted free agent.
What do you mean?
What I mean?
What do you mean?
That you expect them to produce at a higher rate than one undrafted free agent.
You expect them
right.
to.
You could say that the amount that Treadwell failed, like, you take Treadwell's expectations minus Treadwell, and that's probably equal to Adam Thielen minus Adam Thielen's expectations, or at least close to it, which I don't know what that information means or why it is important, but I guess that's how you would parse that.
I'm saying that because I don't think they've learned from their mistakes. I don't think any of the 4 7th-round picks we picked up last year made the team.
No, Stacey Coley, Afedi Adenabo, both of those are there. And I believe the other 2 got poached to other
Wasn't Coley
other
53-man
pick? Roster. No. They had 4 7th-round picks. 2 of them made the roster. One of them was Elijah Lee, who I believe was poached to someone else's 53-man roster.
Yes, he was.
And I believe I don't remember who the last one was.
One was Isidora pick. He was higher than that.
Isidora was a 5th-rounder. I don't remember who there was Coley, Adenabo, Elijah Lee, and I forget who the other 7th-rounder was.
The point wasn't about the wide receivers in that article. It was more of the offensive line and the Brian O'Neill pick, and looking at the offensive line as it stands right now versus even what the offensive line was last year at this point. And what happened in the playoffs was having to shuffle players around. Granted, there were injuries, but we seem to always have injuries on this offensive line.
Everyone does. It's just life.
Yeah, but...
If you know it, they know it.
But the thing is that I said this about a long time ago, that the team was ignoring the offensive line to its detriment. And I know you guys said, well, you have to build a team and you sacrifice positions. And then the team fell apart because the offensive line had a bunch of guys that were injury prone and over 30, and the season fell apart. I think you could look at last season and our concern at the start of the playoffs with how they had to shift the offensive line around and how the production dropped and how the pressure on Keenum against the Eagles, or just the pressure on Keenum in general.
Starting line, and you need depth. We all know. I think that's obvious.
Yeah, I don't. What exactly are you getting at here?
They didn't draft an offensive lineman for 4 years.
Yep.
Above the fourth round.
I was calling for it before I even met you, Joe.
Yeah, I know, and we talked about that.
They
and
made
then,
a mistake.
And
they made a mistake in not moving on, because they had that line was for like most of the Adrian Peterson years was like all the same people, and they made a mistake in not moving on from it fast enough and letting them all get old.
Totally. Agree.
And then it kind of took them a couple years. We actually talked about this on the Pocket Protectors, which released today. They kind of changed the light bulbs all at the same time, and then all the light bulbs went out at the same time.
Right.
It's kind of the way that I like to think about that. When you think about like the 2014, 2015 seasons, Matt Khalil was flaming out at the same time. Phil Odeholt was getting hurt at the same time. John Sullivan was getting old, and those guys were the guys. And they all kind of went away at the same time, and it's going to take a lot of time to build that. But if you listen to that podcast, I'm going to plug it. We talked about how much that's going to matter, and Jason, the host of the podcast, did a little exercise in which he projected the Vikings offensive line to be like 26th or 27th in the league, which is pretty bad.
This year,
and then we kind of talked about how that's not really the end of the world. And in the aggregate, in most situations, having a bad offensive line doesn't kill you, especially on the interior. If your tackles are okay, which I think our tackles are okay, provided Mike Remmers starts at tackle, you can have a functional offense and be pretty much fine. And the interior guys can all kind of look out for each other, so when one fails, it might be part of a double team, and the other guy might have had a good play, so that's okay.
But I thought one of the biggest drawbacks from Cousins during our angry debate was that he was bad under pressure, especially interior pressure. And I think
I don't
that's
remember
where
saying interior pressure. I think blindside pressure is the one that gets him because he doesn't have that internal pocket clock.
Yeah.
Well,
that's what it said.
Either way, that was discussed.
Whatever.
I don't remember how it came up, but
and that's why you're concerned, because you're
because I feel like you spent the most money on a player in NFL history, and we all agreed that they took a risk on how the Hughes thing worked out last show. And it didn't really work out the way they wanted it to in regards to how the picks fell. And
right.
I'm legitimately concerned that, like 2016 and how the playoffs ended last year, and like we talked about profusely with Keenum, he made the line look better statistically because he was some sort of David Copperfield in regards to evading pressure. I feel like it's a risk that they didn't necessarily need to take, and that the fact that we were looking at, okay, Berger's gone, and we might have to shuffle the line around like we did in the playoffs. I just feel like they didn't need to do that, and just based on the way that recent history has shown us, it's just I don't think they've learned from their mistakes at all.
What would you say?
I need to talk you off the ledge here.
I totally agree with you that it's a concern that they did not address the line perhaps as good as they could have, and it's huge. I'm a big proponent. You got to have the offensive line. You got to have the offensive line. Everything starts from there. But what would you say they should have done differently? They should have drafted one of those offensive linemen at the end of the first round, or is that what you're thinking?
I would have taken Connor Williams.
But
that's just me.
I said a couple things in my article. I talked about the guard James Daniels from Iowa, Big Ten, obviously, that the Bears took at 39, who was rated as just a first day starter, potential Pro Bowler. He's a guard center hybrid like Billy Price.
He would have been an amazing scheme fit too. He would have been a great player.
That one burns me a little bit. So I'm not saying like I'm not trying to make this super hyperbolic by tying all these things together. My point was that maybe Spielman needed to, not take as much direction from Zimmer and look at the line, because I feel like the adding somebody to the corner position there's value there, but the risk at the offensive line is so much higher. And maybe Luke, you didn't say interior pressure, but I've heard that from a million people online. And me and Michael Rand have been both writing about that specifically. It just scares me.
Well, maybe if
can I talk you off the ledge?
If let me say this first. If Hughes works out, then you trade Trey Waynes in his contract year for an interior lineman before the season starts. I mean, if they know this. If they haven't learned 2 years ago how much depth they need, they know.
And I feel like there is depth available. I think that what we see right now maybe not be what we see on the field in regards to some of the guys that are available. I think maybe the offensive line needs a little bit of crazy, so maybe Incognito can come in and just nice.
So I think for one, with the draft, they drafted a long-term strategy, right? So the needs that are the needs this year we're not going to have the same needs year after year after year. They're drafting for the needs in the next couple years. I also think they just don't think guards are important, and I think they're a little bit too bullish on that, but I get it. But in terms of offensive line, I don't think we should compare this offensive line to the 2016 one, because the 2016 one lost 4 tackles by week 8. By week 8, the tackles were T.J. Clemmings and Jeremiah Searles. Right now you have Remmers and Reif. Those guys are miles ahead of Clemmings and Searles. So I don't think those are the same people. And
totally.
Yes, I am worried that Kirk Cousins is going to fold under pressure, and we're going to put him under pressure too much, and that might cause us to lose out on scoring and production that we would have had otherwise. And that's something that we've talked about a lot, and I don't think that it needs to be rehashed. But I think if you want to talk about like what happened in 2016, I think the tackles were the problem more than the interior guys. And we've talked about this on the pocket protectors, and I've talked about it a little bit too. Like, just because of the way interior line works, like you're double teaming a 3-tech. So if one of those players is bad, he kind of just needs to be like a dude. And also, I don't know, maybe we should talk about Brian O'Neill and how he looks at OTAs, because I heard he came in over 300, which was his goal, and that's the size game that he needed to play tackle. And if he could play tackle sooner than we thought, and you can move Remmers into guard, who's probably better than like Danny Isadora, then you'd actually have a much better line than we all thought we were going to have.
And they're looking at guards that can move too. They look at their whole offense is about getting guys out in the perimeter and blocking out there. So they're looking for people to fit that scheme, and maybe they didn't see that they had one. But this all is a concern because if the line does break down, then Joe's got to go back to Reddit with his tail between his legs about Kirk Cousins.
I don't know where else I'm allowed or welcome. I might just go to the airport and scream at planes.
Joe. The scheme, the zone scheme, that kind of get guys that can move around. The whole point of that is to make it easier for offensive linemen who aren't very good. Like the whole reason you do that is to put people. If you can get people to a spot faster than the defensive lineman can get to a spot, and your quarterback can also get there, and if it's the plan to get there, Kirk Cousins will be able to do so just fine. That makes it a lot harder on the defensive line, and it's harder on your O-line because they have to move. But if you get guys that can do that, it means that they have an easier time getting leverage, so their technique doesn't have to be quite as good. And because they can get leverage more easily, they don't have to be quite as strong. And that's going to be the problem that would otherwise undo the offensive line. So if you want to, so if they're going to commit to the scheme, that scheme does mitigate having a bad offensive line.
And I have some faith in DiFilippo scheming around it a little better than obviously like North Turner did, but I think Sherman did an admirable job with Bradford and his -3 yard per attempt.
There's nothing.
Record season,
especially with last year. And
I will say
so clear that
North Turner's not real flexible.
I will say that if O'Neill can contribute this year, that would change a lot in regards to my sheer panic. I
think want him to, don't you, Joe? I mean, even though everybody's saying that he's a developmental guy, he's a year away, and in fact, You know what? The rookie
that stems off of size. It stems because he was such a lightweight.
Yeah,
right.
And that's I don't know what he did between.
Sure.
He might have.
I think he put on like 20 pounds.
Yeah. He's on the Joe Johnson diet. He's also Ham's beer and sadness.
Issues.
Joe, he's a pretty determined individual, and he's an athlete. So I don't. I'm not ready to say that he's not going to get in there by the middle to the end of the year.
And I'm saying that if he could contribute this year, just based on size alone, I think that's a huge thing. Otherwise, I feel like maybe they need to go to Joe Berger's house in a private jet.
Right.
He still has a pad level issue. This is a huge thing for him coming out of college, that he couldn't get his pads down and he would lose the leverage battle all the time because he's so tall.
Yeah.
So he still needs to fix that, and that's still going to take some time. So I don't think like, oh, he's over 300 pounds, let's start him, is wise. But that's the first step, is getting to size, and the second step is fixing the pad level thing. And if you can do that, then hey, you got a shot.
And that's his thing. He's an athlete. He's a former tight end. He can be taught. Give him it's technique. You can, if you're an athlete, you can pick that stuff up.
Or throw him screens.
So just to in conclusion, I feel like
we're just concerned about you, Joe.
No, my expectation was versus reality in regards to the draft was like, what? But there's also, like we've joked about, Incognito and how that narrative fell apart in regards to people saying, ooh. I've written about Zane Beadles from the 49ers. He's somebody that is like a poor man's Joe Berger in regards to his ability to play multiple positions. I don't, it's a weird time of the year, so there's really nothing out there in regards to, I don't think anyone he's talked to.
Isn't it, Joe? Wouldn't they get, if they were even to consider him, would be depth?
For sure.
He would probably lose the job to Tom Compton.
But he can fill in at multiple positions at the depth guy. So that makes me less scared. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He'd just be another guy like raising the bar that much more in terms of be better than Zane Beadles to make the team.
Yeah, I mean, he is on the wrong, as much as I just railed against guys on the wrong end of their career, he's not an injury guy, but he's kind of not as good as he was a couple years ago.
He was pretty bad in the limited amount he played last year in San Francisco too, so that probably contributes to why he hasn't been getting any looks from anybody.
Yeah, and who knows, he could end up being like Alex Boone, who came in here in a similar situation and
also a free agent, I think, right? I don't think he's playing in Arizona anymore.
Talked a good game.
No, he came in like overweight and was a huge problem here and then also in Arizona. But I say take him because he's from the Big Ten and I'm blindly biased.
We don't want Boone back here, for crying out loud.
No.
They'll have Easton start. Easton came along nicely as a starter and was missed when he went out.
Yep.
And then whatever happens at right guard happens. You get the package deal of like the 4 guys that are competing for that job, and you guarantee yourself that you get the best one of whoever that is, and that's going to be your line. It's probably not going to be great, but so long as it's not catastrophic, you can work with that.
It's really interesting how many on a team that made it to the NFC Championship game, how many battles there are on the squad. We haven't even touched on one of the ones that got a bit of play Wednesday was the kicking battle. I personally, I
was going to ask you what Forbath said. I forgot about that.
I missed the scrum because I was over on somebody else, but I got him just as he was answering his last question. But he basically said, I'm not shying away from this, and there was a huge group around him because they all wanted the first chance to talk to him since it happened. I mean, the Vikings extend him to a league minimum or whatever the contract was they gave him, and then they draft somebody behind him. But I got to think he's in trouble. That's how I personally feel. But
can't Forbath play guard?
One way to find out.
That with that awesome helmet of his. Oof.
He can move. He can get out there. I don't know if he can block anybody.
Just line up 12 yards back, run up and kick the defensive lineman every play. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, we weren't going to touch on Luke's article about not drafting kickers, but you'd have to assume with taking somebody in the 5th round.
I talked about it on the Pocket Protectors that's out.
What do you think, Luke?
Breakdown there.
What do you think? What do you think about that battle?
About that battle? I mean, I don't think it matters who your kicker is. So I don't know, whichever one looks the best.
Man, tell it to Blair Walsh.
I mean, yeah. If you're so a big part of that article is basically the middle, like 20 to 25 kickers are all roughly the same.
Yeah.
Like, unless you have an elite kicker who can kick from 60 yards and make everything, or a disaster like Blair Walsh, everything else is the same. So long as you have a guy that's at least average and not Blair Walsh, you pretty much are the same as every other team. And other than that, the difference is like 1 or 2 field goals, and the odds that 1 or 2 lands in a game where it actually makes a difference is pretty slim. It's not going to be a thing unless you want somebody with
a pair of stones that will kick a game winner. Then that's all that matters, you know. If they're all the same, you need someone that can.
If Forbath hit that field goal against the Saints with that was a high pressure kick late in the game, even though it didn't end up being the game winner, it could have been if our defense decided to play defense in the second half. I could see why he might be a little frustrated, but his extra points, like we talked about too, I think.
From 2 yards out, not 15. He's got to make the same transition all the NFL kickers struggled with in 2015.
Yeah. So we'll see, but it can't be.
Everybody's exactly the same. It doesn't.
Is it worth?
It's fun though. I like kicker battles. They're fun.
Luke, is it worthwhile looking at the new kicking rules that they're bringing in again this year and see if that's going to factor into how you evaluate your kicker and how important that is? That
you mean the kickoff rules?
Yes. Is that?
I think that makes leg strength less important because touchbacks will be the norm rather than a thing to achieve. You're going to have almost like the kick return has become such a less valuable thing. And touchbacks will be so much easier to achieve that having a guy with a big booming leg isn't necessary anymore to achieve a lot of touchbacks.
The less, Joe, it's got to be good if, the less we have to depend on kickers to win ball games. Isn't that a good thing, right? Eventually.
Yeah, with any luck, we'll be winning games by more than 3.
Exactly.
So we also wanted to touch on the kneeling issue that seems to keep coming back because despite the fact that the summit with North Korea was just called off, apparently our president also needs to tweet about the NFL. And we don't like to get like hyper political on the show either, just because it's football and people. Obviously, they have their argument against the kneeling is that they want to watch football and not think about politics, and they feel like politics are injected into everything. But I do feel like they feel like the politics that they don't agree with are injected in everything, but they're okay with the opposite, with their politics.
I wonder how long those thoughts of politics last. As soon as the kickoff, as soon as Kai Forbath lines it up, I think they're no longer thinking about kneeling, are they?
Was that a prediction?
No. It is not.
I just wanted to ask you, Joe, about that in regards to how did that story develop? Like reading that.
It should have died. It should have died. It should be over and done with. But Trump got it back into relevance last year, and then it got enough people, or the numbers wavered enough that the owners thought they had to take it up at their meetings and do something about it.
Didn't Goodell lie and say that the owners were unanimously for it when they weren't?
Well, I don't know about that. But,
okay, I read that today.
I don't care. Like I don't even care about that. It's civil disobedience, and if you look up the term, it's about doing something. Well, I had a term up here somewhere, but I'm not going to read it. But it's part of our country's history. Is if you don't disagree with something, you peacefully protest something, and here's an opportunity to do so, and it's fine. Let the people do it. If it bothers you, go get a frickin' beer or some damn thing. I just don't get it anymore. It's so much ado about nothing, and it allows a distraction for the distractor in chief, and it's
that's what it is.
And it's so much to do about nothing. You know, people have a right to say this, and I have a right to say what I'm saying. And if you disagree with me, great, you have that right. I don't care. You know, I still feel the same way I do about the flag, God, and country, whether a football player agrees with me or not. That doesn't change.
And as a fairly liberal person, I really hate cliche arguments that people use when they're trying to be clever, even though it's something that they clearly copied from somebody else. So I really hate the term snowflake, because I could tell people think that means they're super witty, even though they're just copying.
And you don't resemble a snowflake in any form or fashion, no offense.
But I'm trying, and that's what matters. And so just to hear, like I said, when people agree with things unless it's not on their side, and if liberals were doing the same thing, they'd be called snowflakes for not being able to handle the First Amendment. And I seem to recall one of the best moments in sports history was during the Olympics with the Black Power fist moment. Mm-hmm. It's similar to that.
Mexico.
Yep. So, like you said, it's not the end of the world. They have a right to do it. I understand that the NFL brands itself as middle America, pro-military, that sort of thing, and it goes against their image. But it's America, and you're allowed to do it. So it's. If
you stop watching the game because of that, then to be honest, I don't know that you did. Secondly, it's then maybe you're not that interested in it to begin with. That's fine. This $1 billion monolith that's the NFL is going to survive fine, and whatever.
And I feel like if you're big enough of a football fan that you're on the purplePTSD Facebook page, and we got more comments last season from people not responding to the articles but saying, I don't watch football anymore because they're kneeling too much. And I'm like, well, you're here, so yes, you are watching football, and you are also very deep into it. So yeah, I think they're watching it and then saying they're not. But yeah, wouldn't it be great if this issue would go away forever?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to recommend Arif Hassan's Stick to Sports article. He wrote it around the time last season when Trump was making his comments and the whole thing was really at its head. It's a great article detailing all the times when politics and sports intersected, and it created historic moments, and how politics and sports are just always going to be intertwined, whether you like it or not. And then I'll just say, if you banishing protests off of the field and basically saying, by putting players in the locker room if they don't want to stand for the anthem, that you're basically saying you can't protest, which is within the NFL's legal rights, but it's also within my legal rights to say that makes them dicks.
Yeah.
That is all legal and fine, but know that is the NFL saying that the players cannot protest. And we should be having the discussion about what we think of that decision, not, well, they can protest by not being in the locker room. That's basically saying that, they can protest by getting out of the public eye. That's not a protest.
And they're totally, by doing that, building on this growing just expanse between the owners and the players. And especially Goodell and the players. I feel like there's just a large disconnect. And a lot of it has to do with race. A lot
of it has to do with Goodell works for the owners.
It's the owners.
I framed the question that way.
Don't want the uppity players to be uppity.
Because they came out today that I think it was the Jets and the 49ers owner came out and said, well, Goodell said we were unanimous, but we weren't. He just made that up. And I'm always astounded by how much Goodell just wings his job for super important decisions. It seems like there's been so many things like Ray Rice or Adrian Peterson where he's kind of made things up as he went along. This laissez-faire attitude in regards to creating policy based on things that happen all the time, and domestic violence being one of them. They knew that was a problem. They just didn't do anything about it because ratings are going up every year, and so was the revenue. And when that goes down, obviously they're panicking because the pie is shrinking. And I don't know. I'm amazed by Goodell's lack of.
One thing that's important to remember too, as you go into your internet arguments about this, is that the teams are the ones being fined if a player kneels for the anthem. Okay. So if somebody does kneel for the anthem, it does not necessarily fall on that player. It falls on his team. And if the team wants to, they can say, well, we'll eat the fines, and this is what the Jets did. We'll eat the fines, and we will not discipline the players ourselves. It's up to the teams to say, like, if, Jaleel Johnson kneels for the anthem, it's up to the Vikings to discipline him, and the NFL will find the Vikings themselves, which is an interesting dynamic, and I think important context when, it comes to actually week 1, and if someone kneels, it's important to remember that it's their team that's going to be tasked with making that decision, not necessarily the NFL, which leads me to believe that there was definitely not a consensus in the room of owners, and I would imagine there's a diversity of opinion amongst the owners, and that's why they came up with that idea, so that they can basically say, all right, we're not going to agree, so you just do with your team what you're going to do, and I'll do with my team what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and that's the best way to do it.
It was interesting how Zimmer responded when the question was put to him by Brian Murphy, Pioneer Press. He actually went out there and said he was proud of his team last year for standing for it. He said they should continue to and honor the flag in the right way, and I can't disagree with it. I can't disagree with anything he said, but I can't also think that that's not going to cause some concern in the locker room, because I'm sure not everybody feels that way. So it's too bad that this came back up. It's still roiling around there. It's too bad that people cannot allow everybody their country given or constitutional right to express themselves and any way they seem fit. It's not like they're disrespecting it. I mean, kneeling is not a disrespectful act. Maybe it's perceived that way here, but intrinsically it is not. It is not. Civil disobedience. It's a long, peaceful protest.
The idea was from military veterans because it was more respectful than sitting on the bench.
Exactly. And when you listen to a lot of the vets who have chimed in on it, there's plenty of them that support. They said this is what we fought for their ability to say this. And if you can just get past that and not listen to the rhetoric of the distractor in chief, you're going to be all the better, and you're going to go to the game and you're going to enjoy the game for what it is, because it is a game. It happens in this country, and it's part of us. It's part of America, and for whatever reason, it's okay to do this. It might not make you happy, but it's okay.
The point is to make you unhappy.
Yes. And I think that's an important distinction really quickly. As a political science major, I take a class and you learn about framing of issues politically, and I think that the right wing is masterful in regards to their ability to frame issues, whether it's Black Lives Matter or kneeling. They turned kneeling into something about the military when it wasn't. They've turned Black Lives Matter into saying Black Lives Matter more than White Lives Matter, as opposed to the true meaning, which is Black Lives also matter. So people, I think they listen to the media that they consume that reinforces their worldview, and they say this is disrespectful to the military, when clearly these football players aren't protesting the military, they're protesting the police and socioeconomic issues. So it is irritating when it does feel like one side is arguing about something that doesn't exist, but it polls well for Trump. It's a political winner, so he's going to do it. It's going to come up this season, and, I just chalk it up to my luck buying 2 Vikings websites the first time that the NFL has actually lost viewership.
Only Nielsen viewership. They lost less viewership than everything else on TV did. It's just there's a lot of cord cutters.
And you can consume football in different ways now. Also, I think. Yeah. They worry about not the TV stuff, but they opened it up to Twitter. And maybe they didn't think about that. But anyway, we're up against the clock. I don't know if you guys wanted to plug a couple articles really quickly. I think that if you're on the right wing of the political spectrum, you'll be looking forward to Joe and I's analysis of Karl Marx coming up.
You don't need to make that joke for those people. They're not here anymore.
That is the intro for sure. But yeah, I wanted to say. No, I was just gonna say. In the meantime, people also should check out our message board, because we are kind of growing there, which is really, really cool, and you can interact with us there and tell us why we're wrong if you'd like to, and we won't get mad about that.
I'll be back out at OTAs next week and seeing what's up.
Perfect. Well,
in the pocket protectors.
For sure. I think we're going to start posting that on our site, too. We should figure out how that's going to work, because that makes a lot of sense.
It'll talk you off the O-line ledge, make you feel better about the O-line.
I'll send it to Michael Rand, too, and then I'll listen to some Third Eye Blind for a while. But with that, follow us on social media, Facebook and Twitter, purplePTSD and VikingsTerritory. This has been the Purple Journal podcast. Thanks for